because you don't.
This is actually working out in my favor.
I went into this thinking the Kardashians had simply overstayed their welcome. About 3 hours into the research, I completely changed my mind. Because the more I dug into their story, the more I realized I'd been looking at them completely the wrong way. The Kardashians weren't just another celebrity family. They changed what being famous actually meant. Before the Kardashians, fame usually came after you did something. You made hit movies, you won championships, you released albums. The Kardashians flipped that idea on its head. Somehow, they turned their personal lives into the product, and the crazy part is, it worked. Better than anyone expected. And once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. Their fingerprints were everywhere. Reality stars building billion-dollar companies, influencers turning their lives into businesses, celebrities treating Instagram like a boardroom instead of a photo album. 20 years ago, almost nobody was playing that game. Today, almost everybody is. 20 years ago, that wasn't the norm. The Kardashians helped make it one. That's the thought I couldn't get out of my head. If they changed celebrity culture this much, how did celebrity culture end up leaving them behind? And before anyone says, but they're still famous, of course they are. Kim is still one of the most recognizable people on the planet. Skims is still a massive business. Kylie can still post a photo and reach hundreds of millions of people. Fame isn't what disappeared. The feeling around them did. There was a point where it felt like every conversation somehow led back to the Kardashians. Now, it feels like they're trying to find their way back into conversations they used to own. That's when I realized this wasn't really a Kardashian story anymore. It was a story about what happens when the people who changed the game wake up one day and realize everyone else learned how to play it too. Ask almost anyone how the Kardashians became famous and you'll probably get the same answer. The tape. It's the version of the story everybody remembers. It also happens to be the version that leaves out almost everything that actually built the empire. The story actually starts years before reality TV. Long before cameras were following the Kardashians around, the family already had a foot in Hollywood. Robert Kardashian wasn't just a successful businessman. In 1995, he became one of the most recognizable faces in America after joining O.J. Simpson's defense team during the quote-unquote trial of the century. Almost overnight, the Kardashian name went from being known in Beverly Hills to being known across the entire country. Then there's Kris Jenner, and I honestly think she's one of the most underestimated people in modern entertainment. Before everyone started talking about building a personal brand, Kris was already doing it. She understood that attention wasn't something you stumbled into, it was something that you managed. The interviews, the photo ops, the relationships, none of it felt accidental. Every move kept the family exactly where they wanted to be, right in the middle of the conversation. Kim was studying celebrity long before she became one. Working as Paris Hilton's stylist and assistant didn't make her famous, it gave her a front row seat. She watched how paparazzi picked their shots. She saw what magazines put on their covers. She learned why some celebrities disappeared after a year while others stayed in the headlines. By the time the world discovered Kim Kardashian, she'd already spent years learning how the entire machine worked. Then came the tape. Whether you believe Kim's account, Ray J's account, or somewhere in the middle, one thing isn't really up for debate. The controversy put Kim Kardashian in front of an audience she'd never had before. On its own, though, that wasn't enough to build an empire. Scandals create attention. They don't usually create careers. That's where the timing becomes almost unbelievable. Just months later, Keeping Up with the Kardashians premiered on E! America was already falling in love with reality television. The Osbournes had shown people wanted to peek inside celebrity homes. The Simple Life proved audiences enjoyed watching famous personalities outside their polished public image. The Kardashians arrived right as viewers wanted something that felt messy, personal, and unscripted, even if it wasn't always as spontaneous as it looked. Looking back, I don't think any of this happened by accident. The opportunities were there, but the Kardashians knew exactly how to capitalize on them. I don't think we appreciate this enough about the Kardashians. They didn't invent celebrity. They reinvented what celebrities were supposed to do. For decades, Hollywood worked a certain way. You became famous because of your work. Actors made movies, athletes won championships, musicians released hit records. Fame was the reward. If you landed a perfume deal or a clothing line afterward, great. But those were side businesses. Nobody expected them to become the main event. I kept asking myself why the Kardashians became so much bigger than every other reality TV family, and then it hit me. They were never trying to use fame as a reward. They were using it as the product. That's why Keeping Up with the Kardashians worked so differently. Most reality shows were built around a concept. This one was built around a family, which meant the story never really ended. Every relationship became an episode. Every episode became headlines. Those headlines turned into interviews, and before long, the entire thing was feeding itself. I always thought the businesses came first. They didn't. The relationship came first. By the time Kylie launched lip kits, millions of people already felt like they'd watched her grow up. She wasn't introducing herself to customers. She was giving people who already knew her something to buy. The more I thought about it, the more I realized they weren't just selling makeup anymore. People weren't buying makeup from Kylie. They were buying it from someone they felt like they'd grown up with. And that's a very different business. Then social media came along, and this is where I realized the Kardashians were already miles ahead of everyone else. Before Instagram, celebrities still relied on magazine covers, paparazzi photos, and TV appearances to stay relevant. The Kardashians suddenly didn't need any of that anymore. They could tell their own story whenever they wanted to millions of people without asking anyone for permission. That's when it hit me. Instagram wasn't replacing Keeping Up with the Kardashians. It had become Keeping Up with the Kardashians. The cameras never stopped rolling. They just moved into everyone's pocket. Every post kept people invested. Every appearance quietly promoted the next business. Before long, the line between celebrity, influencer, and entrepreneur had almost disappeared. Actors started launching skincare brands, athletes built podcasts and clothing companies, reality stars became founders. Influencers followed the exact same blueprint because the Kardashians had already shown the entire industry that it worked. The more I thought about it, the more I came back to the same conclusion. Their biggest legacy was never the reality show or even the businesses. It was the blueprint they left behind. They figured out how to turn attention into money before almost anyone else did. And eventually, the rest of the internet caught up. This is where the story took another turn that I wasn't expecting. The Kardashians had already survived controversies that would have ended a lot of celebrity careers. People criticized their relationships, questioned the reality show, mocked the businesses, and picked apart the way that they look. Every few months, there seemed to be another headline predicting this would finally be the scandal that brought the whole empire down. It never happened. If anything, they usually came back even bigger. So I kept asking myself, if one controversy was never enough to hurt them, what actually changed? The answer, I think, is a lot less dramatic than people expect. Trust rarely disappears all at once. It fades a little at a time. Until one day, people just don't look at you the same way anymore. It didn't happen because of one huge scandal. It was a lot of smaller moments that slowly started stacking on top of each other. Kylie Jenner spent years saying her noticeably fuller lips were just the result of makeup before eventually admitting she'd had lip fillers. Kim's self-made billionaire label created a similar reaction. Nobody questioned that she'd built incredible businesses. What people questioned was whether self-made was really the right description for someone who already had wealth, connections, and one of the most famous last names in America. On their own, neither story changed much, but together, they slowly started changing the way people looked at the family. The same thing happened with the show. Back in 2007, audiences were willing to believe they were watching a family simply living their lives with cameras nearby. Years later, fans started noticing scenes that looked recreated, conversations that didn't quite match the timeline, and storylines that felt a little too convenient. Reality television had always involved production, but viewers weren't looking at it the same way anymore. They weren't asking, "Is this entertaining?" They were asking, asking, how much of this is actually real? Then, social media changed too. When Instagram first took off, the Kardashians were practically built for it. Perfectly curated feeds, luxury vacations, flawless family photos. Every post looked like it belonged in a magazine. For a while, that was exactly what people wanted. But somewhere along the way, the internet started rewarding something completely different. Creators were filming in their kitchens, leaving mistakes in their videos, talking straight into their phones without a production team following them around. The polished look that had made the Kardashians so aspirational slowly started feeling less authentic. You could almost watch that shift happening in real time. As the creator economy exploded, hundreds of people started building the kind of connection that used to be almost impossible. Followers didn't just admire them, they felt like they actually knew them. The funny part is, that was the exact relationships the Kardashians had spent years building through reality television. The only difference was that now millions of creators had figured out how to do the same thing, and they didn't need a TV network or a production company to make it happen. That's when I realized the Kardashian formula hadn't stopped working, it had stopped being unique. Once everyone knows how the trick is done, it's not really magic anymore, is it? Then COVID happened, and I don't think enough people realized how much it changed the way we look at celebrity. The Kardashians didn't suddenly lose millions of fans overnight. The world around them changed. By the time COVID was over, the internet wasn't the same place it had been a few years earlier. Back when Keeping Up with the Kardashians first aired, celebrities controlled almost everything. If you wanted to know what was happening in Hollywood, you bought a magazine, watched Entertainment Tonight, or waited for TMZ to break the story. A small group of people decided who stayed in the spotlight, and the Kardashians became incredibly good at playing that game. They always knew how to keep the cameras pointed in their direction. Then something even bigger changed. It wasn't just social media anymore. The internet started working differently. TikTok didn't become another app competing with Instagram. It completely changed how people discovered entertainment. For decades, editors, TV executives, and magazine publishers decided who got attention. Now, an algorithm was making that decision every time you refreshed your screen. 1 minute, you're watching someone review snacks from a gas station. The next, it's a history teacher explaining the Roman Empire. Then somehow, a musician with 50 followers ends up with the biggest song in the country. What really stood out to me was that none of these people had to go through Hollywood anymore. They didn't need a TV network, a movie studio, or a magazine putting them on a cover. If people connected with what they were making, that was enough. That's a completely different world from the one the Kardashians built their empire in. That's the part I found almost ironic. The Kardashians helped create influencer culture, but somewhere along the way, influencers stopped trying to become celebrities. They became the celebrities. 10 years ago, brands wanted the biggest name they could afford. Today, they're just as happy working with someone who has a fraction of the followers if people actually trust them. Reach still matters, but it isn't everything anymore. Connection became just as valuable. You can see that shift everywhere. Perfect Instagram feeds don't have the same pull they used to. People would rather watch a creator filming on an iPhone than another celebrity posing in front of a luxury resort because the content feels real. It's less polished, a little messier, and for a lot of people, that's exactly the point. And I think that's the problem the Kardashians never really had an answer for. Their entire brand was built around aspiration. People looked at their lives and wanted what they had. But Gen Z grew up on a completely different internet. They weren't chasing perfection nearly as much as previous generations. They wanted people who felt relatable, unfiltered, and real. By the time Gen Z became the most influential audience online, they already had creators they genuinely connected with. They had grown up with YouTubers, streamers, TikTok creators, and podcasters, not the Kardashians. That's why I don't think Gen Z ever rejected them. I think most of them just never formed that connection in the first place. And if an entire generation never buys into your story, it's almost impossible to convince them to care halfway through it. The more I worked on this video, the more I realized I'd been asking the wrong question. I kept trying to figure out why the Kardashians seemed to be losing relevance, but somewhere along the way, that stopped being the interesting part. The question I couldn't stop coming back to was, how did they manage to stay on top for almost 20 years? Because if we're being honest, Hollywood has never been short on beautiful celebrities, famous families, or reality TV shows. Those things existed long before Keeping Up with the Kardashians. None of them explain why one family managed to dominate pop culture for nearly 2 decades while so many others came and went. I think the answer is actually pretty simple. The Kardashians understood something about attention long before almost anybody else did. They realized every interview, every relationship, every controversy, every episode of the reality show, and every product launch could all feed the same story. Nothing was ever treated like a separate event. The reality show sold the family sold the businesses created more headlines, and those headlines sent people right back to the show. Looking back, it almost seems obvious, but at the time, almost nobody else was thinking that way. Today, that way of thinking is everywhere. Creators build businesses around it. Brands build marketing campaigns around it. Even athletes understand that attention doesn't stop when the game ends. That's what makes today's internet so different. Attention isn't controlled by a handful of celebrities anymore. It moves wherever people decide to give it. I don't think the Kardashians suddenly forgot how to be famous. I think they mastered one version of the internet, and then the internet moved on. The strange part is that they helped create the world that replaced them. The blueprint they built became so successful that eventually everybody started following it. The family that changed celebrity culture also helped create a world where celebrity by itself just isn't enough anymore. So, no, I don't think we're watching the collapse of the Kardashian empire. I think we're watching the end of the version of fame they understood better than anyone else. And honestly, I think that's the much more interesting story. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure you subscribe to Fame Planet. We've got a lot more stories like this breaking down the moments, controversies, and turning points that shaped some of the biggest names in entertainment. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.